All right, so AIM 3.6 should be in your book. What are the causes and effects of the Irish potato famine? We just talked about the quote, so here we go. All right, lots of notes. I'll give you a minute. All right, so the relationship between Ireland and England is an interesting one. And this is another chapter in that saga. So going back to the mid 1500s, Ireland kind of becomes a colony of England. Not exactly, but mostly. So we'll call it a colony. So basically, during the Industrial Revolution, after the Agricultural Revolution, England, industrial England, we're fast forwarding a couple hundred years now, industrial England is using Ireland as its own personal farm. Okay? And what's happening in Ireland is that most of the land in Ireland is used to grow crops that will be sent to England. Okay? Those crops are supposed to be feeding the industrial population. That's what they're for. Now, Ireland was paid for these crops a nominal amount so that they can kind of just keep up and running and producing crops. But the industrial population is growing in England so quickly that the demand for food is growing very fast. So, what England used to do is they used to have very high tariffs on imported food. This way, the Irish food would the price would remain high, and they can kind of survive. Now, with the demand growing, what England decides to do is lower those tariffs on imported food. And what this does is this makes all of the food cheaper because everyone has to be in competition with each other, right? If England lowers tariffs and all of a sudden imported food is half the cost of Irish food, no one's going to buy the Irish food. They're all going to buy the imported food. So when England lowers the tariffs on imported food, the sale price of all food, including the Irish crops, goes down. Now Ireland has less money to work with than it had before. All right, I'll give you a minute here. All right, while you finish. So the prices have come down. Now Ireland has a choice. They can continue producing the same amount of food for England that they always have and just bring in less money. But that's going to put them in a very, very tough spot, right? So, what the other option that they have is they can start using even more farmland to dedicate to British crops. And that means there's even less farmland than before to produce food for Irish people. And that's what they decide to do. In order to maintain the revenue coming in, they dedicate even more of their farmland to producing cash crops to send to England for the industrial population. So now the farmers have even less land to use than ever before. Now, on the land that the Irish are using for themselves, they're growing potatoes. Potatoes are a great thing to grow, especially in this part of the world, because they're very, very durable. You can grow them in an inch of soil. It doesn't necessarily have to be particularly nutritious soil, and they can kind of weather a lot of kind of poor climate and things like that. So they're very, very kind of sturdy and resilient crop. On the rest of the farmland, they're not growing potatoes, they're growing wheat and barley and things like that uh, to support Great Britain. So what happens is in the years 1845 to 1849, the potato crop, which is what Ireland was growing for itself, was struck with like a fungus. It was almost like a plague entirely for crops, and it destroyed the Irish potato crop. And this is called you might hear this referred to as the potato blight. So the interesting thing here is that Ireland, on their land in Ireland, they're producing a ton of food, okay? but all of it's going to England. So um, they don't really have much of a choice. They're basically starving to death and surrounded by all kinds of food. But because of the Industrial Revolution and the industrial population growth, England forces the continued export of those crops from Ireland to England. So basically, Irish people are literally starving to death while they are harvesting crops that they're not allowed to have any of. And that's really the story of the Irish potato famine. So when we go back and we kind of look at England and Ireland and their relationship, this is a significant chapter in that story and why they don't get along very well. Okay, this is a big part of that. So even though they're starving to death and there's food all around them, they're not allowed to have any of it because that food is needed by England to support the growing industrial population. Okay, we have one more slide. So let's just look critically at this graph here. The height of the graph, where the population of Ireland, let's focus on the population of Ireland, is a little over 8 million. Okay. That is at what, 1840 or so? So by 1850, you've already lost 12% of the population. You went from a little over 8 to about 7. So that's 1.25, a percentage and change. Million and change. And then you could see this precipitous decline. Long story short, we hit rock bottom, 1930 or so, is the low point of the graph here. So we went from over 8 million to about 4 million in 90 years. So the population of Ireland was literally divided in half. If that happened here in America, that would be like 170 million people leaving. That is a serious exodus of the highest order. Okay. And all of these people are leaving for America, a lot of them, and other places. And this creates this intense feeling of nationalism. And the interesting thing is that when you compare the population of Ireland to the population of the rest of Europe, now obviously we're not operating on the same scale. Ireland is in millions, and the population of Europe is in hundreds of millions. So this isn't 4 million; it's 400 million, right? But you could see the sharp increase, the continual increase in the population. So basically, everyone in Europe is doing great and growing, except for Ireland, and that's it. So this is one of those situations where, I guess, if you want to make an omelet, you got to break a few eggs. Ireland is the egg that is broken. And in its place, the rest of Europe kind of thrives. So, I mean, it raises an interesting question. How much misery should Ireland have to deal with in order to sustain the success of the entire continent? And that's not a question that anyone could really answer. But, I mean, that's what's happening here. They suffer, and Europe, the rest of Europe grows greatly at a great expense to Ireland, where half of their population is gone. And that's a tough pill to swallow. So as the Irish kind of flee Ireland for the New World and a lot of other places, this they rally around this experience, and this kind of glues these people together in ethnic enclaves and creates an extreme sense of nationalism for the Irish people. So that's really the deal. Now, just to kind of wrap it all up, the whole idea here is that this is all related to industry, right? It is the demand for food of the growing industrial population in Europe that forces this situation. Okay? Because those people need food at the expense of the Irish, and then the Irish, were growing potatoes, which I guess is just bad luck that this fungus kind of affects potatoes and nothing else. I mean, this is kind of what happens here. So, you can argue that if the Industrial Revolution never happened, Ireland would not be in this position, right? Because they were forced to have only a small sliver of their own land available to them for use, because they had to dedicate so much of their land to growing crops for England. This is what put them in this precarious position, and this is the result of that. So, as far as like what this has to do with industry, that's the connection to industry and the Industrial Revolution. So, the Irish potato famine is a direct result of the growing industrial population and their demand for food at the expense of Ireland. That is the bottom line.